Hello everybody, this car was first registered on the 25th of April 1990 at Nigel Mansell Sports Cars, meaning it is technically a 90s car. However, is there anything more 80s than a yellow Testarossa? Yes, a white Testarossa, thanks I'm sure in no small part due to its starring role in Miami Vice. Then of course you've got the red Testarossa, always a favourite colour. Now you'd be forgiven for thinking that a car like this nowadays would command a serious premium, because let's be honest here, all classic cars are very expensive right now, especially those with a prancing horse on the front. When a good example of one of the less desirable, more common Lamborghini Countach would set you back at least £250,000, I think it's reasonable to assume a Testarossa would be about the same. In actual fact, to get your hands on one of these, you could pay about half as much. So why is that? First off, there's Rarity. You see, Lamborghini in the 16 years the Countach was in production made just over 2,000 of them, whereas the Testarossa was built for less than half that time, in which Ferrari made 7,177. Of those, 438 were UK right-hand drive examples, and from that 438, only 8 were sold in yellow, and of those 8, only one had a magnolia interior. This one. So I best not crash it. Now, said interior is rather 80s-tastic, and I have to say, I'm not really a fan. It's all sort of squared off edges and a mixture of very, very nice leather with this brown carpet that I've really never quite understood. Don't know why. Testarossas, they loved their brown interiors. Don't ask. The steering wheel is a very beautiful Momo item, very simple, very elegant. The pedals are the classic Ferrari drilled aluminium items, but they're way offset even by Ferrari standards. You have a 5-speed dogleg gear lever here in the middle and some very, very old school looking orange dials. The radio is hidden behind this little flip up compartment here, and it's very, very cramped. I'm 5'10" and I only just about fit. A good friend of mine has recently acquired a 512 BBI, and I'm not surprised that he doesn't fit in it at 6 foot, because he wouldn't fit in this, and this has even more room than the old 512. Not a good start. It's also a mechanically very compromised car. This engine certainly does the numbers. It's 4.9 litres in a flat 12 configuration, the same as Ferrari's old Formula 1 cars. It makes 390 horsepower, 361 pound-foot of torque, that's 490 newton meters, and it all sits behind these beautiful red cam covers, from which the Testarossa gets its name. However, there is a problem. Because of packaging reasons, Ferrari didn't really have many places to put the gearbox. If it went behind the engine, where you'd expect, the car would be even longer and bigger than it already is. If it went ahead of the engine, Lamborghini style, the cabin would have even less room than it does. So the gearbox went under the engine. That means it sits very high, therefore spoiling one of the main reasons to have a flat engine, the low centre of gravity. But there's an even bigger issue. That engine is a direct evolution of the unit found in the old 512 BBI, and that car had a couple of problems Ferrari were trying to solve. Namely, because they had the radiators up the front, boot space was somewhat compromised and the cabin tended to get very warm. So the obvious solution, move the radiators, put them at the back on the sides of the car. However, this then means two things. Firstly, the car needs to get wider, and the Testarossa is half a foot wider than the car it replaced. That's pretty big. By modern standards, it's not actually that wide, but in its day, I can see why it got the reputation for being such a big old thing. You also had the issue of how to get air to said radiators, because what you ideally needed was a big hole in the side of the car. But many markets around the world said to Ferrari, you can't do that. And so their solution was this. The famous side strakes that became a Testarossa styling hallmark, and something that was then echoed on the 348. In fact, if you even look at the side of a 355, you think it doesn't have side strakes, but it does. They've just hidden them all the way back here where you can't see them. In fact, another thing shared between the Testarossa and 355 is how you get in, because both have a hidden door handle. Down there. The original Testarossa was in production from roughly 1984 to 1991, and over that time it evolved a fair bit. Early cars are most highly prized by collectors. Some of those have what they call the monospecchia, that's the single wing mirror that's kind of halfway up the A-pillar, apparently nearly impossible to actually use, but looks very cool. And they've also got centre-lock wheels, which take only Michelin TRX tyres. A very clever idea at the time, but now simply a pain to try and get tyres for. Later cars are seen as much more usable, and in 1992 they facelifted this into the 512TR. That's the one with the 348 looking front, and that's the car that Chris Harris owns. It is apparently much better to drive and use again over this. Then in 1994 that became the F512M. You can spot that pretty easily because it's got a 355 looking front and it's got some nasty split rim alloys on it. 18-inch, apparently the biggest fitted to any production car at the time. I really don't like the 512M, and I've yet to meet anybody that actually does. In 1996 the Ferrari 550 replaced the lot, and since then Ferrari have not made another flat 12 engine or another series production mid-engine V12. In truth, I've absolutely no idea what to expect from this. All I really know is that many people have told me that because when this car was built, old man Ferrari was indeed an old man, it's actually much more of a GT car than an outright sports car. But is there something inherently flawed about the mid-engine flat 12 platform, or does this car still have a charm of its own? Time to find out. I can honestly say this is not at all what I expected. First off, I am very grateful for the tubey exhaust that's been fitted to this car, because as standard, they're pretty much silent. And that's a shame when you've got close to 5 litres of Italian flat 12 goodness perched behind you. It's also a far firmer, tighter and tauter thing than I possibly expected. Everyone told me this is more of a GT car, it's more of a relaxed ride, it's not an out-and-out sports car. That really would have been the 308, or I suppose actually the 348 by the time this particular car hit the showroom. But that's just not how it feels at all. Yes, all the controls are fairly heavy, and I am cooking. It's really rather warm in here. But everything, and I mean absolutely everything in here, has this most amazing sense of weighting and accuracy to it. No, it's not easy to drive, it's not friendly, it's not welcoming, but it is proper old school Italian supercar. So let's talk about things in more detail, and this being a Ferrari, I suppose we should begin with the engine. Absolutely magnificent. It responds so well, and you more or less can't catch it off guard. Even from about 1500 to 2000 RPM, absolutely instant, and there's a reasonable amount of torque available at more or less all times. However, because of the lack of any sort of variable trickery, it is pretty old school in its power delivery. So if you really want the best from it, you have to rev it out. You've got to get it beyond 5,000 RPM where it really does come alive. And then it genuinely feels its full close to 400 horsepower. I'm going to have to open that window. I've played with all of the settings here and done absolutely everything that I can to try and get the AC working, but I have failed. I'm sure there's probably a really obvious way to get it going, but I've yet to find it. I also appear to have accidentally dropped into another YouTuber's shoot because Joe Achilles is just down there. So, the engine, actually pretty good, but then that's not a surprise because more or less everybody tends to agree that the engine was the star of the show. Next up, let's talk about the gearbox. Actually, another pleasant surprise. Yes, it hasn't really done the overall dynamics any favours by being perched underneath said engine, but as a thing to use, it's delightful. You need a firm hand to operate it, but it's got a really nice action, and you get that classic Ferrari click-clack. Not too much of it. I'd say you get more in the 355, 550, but this is still absolutely joyous. heel and toe, no problem whatsoever, and the brake's actually quite decent as well. I'm not sure how much I trust them in an emergency, but I trust them a lot more than the tyres which are currently on this car. They're Kumos, 16-year-old Kumos. I don't know what it is about Ferrari owners and their general refusal to want to put new rubber on cars, but don't worry, I've already taken the owner of this to task. Not too much, by the way, because he's been lovely, letting me drive not just one, but 2 cars from his collection. This and his Challenge Stradale. So at long last, I can tell you what one of those is like. I can't tell you now because this is not that review, and also I haven't actually driven the Stradale yet. Very frustrating. I've done the drive-bys, I've done the statics, I've done my intro, but I haven't driven it. So that'll come soon. But let's talk more about the Testarossa. Driving position is Italian at best. I am 5'10" and I struggle to get in here. Anyone taller than that, you're not going to have much luck. Not sure what all the brown is about. I'm really not a fan of that, but hey ho, let's not worry about it. The dials, orange as they may be, are at least very clear, easy to read, and I do like that they're simple. You know exactly at all points in time what is going on. Fuel and oil temp being down here behind your left knee, I'm not so fond of because those are quite important. I think they should be a little bit more visible. In terms of fuel economy, probably best to ask no questions and will be told no lies. Let's be honest about it. It's a 30-something-year-old 12-cylinder Ferrari. If it didn't drink like Oliver Reed on a particularly good bender, you'd be disappointed, wouldn't you? The clutch, brake and throttle all have a fairly hefty weighting to them, but they're actually quite easy to modulate. Often on Ferraris of this era, the throttle can be a little bit sticky, but this isn't too bad. I have stalled the car a few times, but then I've been doing fairly tricky things with it. What really impresses me though is the way this goes down a road, because honestly, with everything that I'd heard and the way I built up this car in my mind, I thought it would be utterly and totally useless. But in actual fact, it's not. Does get a little bit of a wobble on at speed, but other than that, this thing is an absolute joy. Engine response is sensational, but the real surprise for me, the genuine standout of this car, is the steering. Once you're above anything over walking speed, it's actually really light, very delicate, but it then gains this real heft to give you a confidence when you're in the middle of a corner, and that's exactly what you need in something that has absolutely nothing in the way of driver aids. Very important for sections of road like this. If you told me that I would have the confidence to hustle a car like this, I would have called you a liar, sir. A bounder, a cad, and a liar. But no, I am absolutely loving it. The gearbox does seem to be giving me a little bit more issue as the car gets warmer, but the rest of it is absolutely magnificent. I'm really very impressed with this. Now, in truth, if you look at this as a 1990s car, you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed with its outright pace, and a lot of stuff from Japan of the period would run rings around it. If you see it as a child of the 80s, I think you'd be rather impressed, because I am. This really is very special. I hate the seats. They're not supportive, they're not comfortable. You have to lean the seat all the way back just to fit in the damn thing. I wish it had a bit more headroom in it. How it's got so little, I don't know, because you really do sit on the floor. But in terms of the way it drives, no complaints from me whatsoever. The Testarossa, I'll confess, has not been a car I've ever really liked. That's based mostly, of course, on the way it looks. It just does nothing for me. It's all weird and square, and the silly lines on the side I'm just not into at all. But this is mega, absolutely mega. I was all ready to give you the conclusion that, you know, this is that kind of car where, yeah, sure, pretty lovely, have it in a collection, look at it, don't drive it. No, no, nothing could be further from the truth. The suspension is a little bit firmer than you think, and the car never seems entirely comfortable in its own skin down this road, but not to the point where it's really interrupting proceedings. It's actually far more composed than I ever expected it to be, considering this was a car made really with one eye very closely on the American market. I thought it might have been tuned for American sensibilities, but no, this feels like a proper European thoroughbred. I understand entirely why people missed it when it went, but having driven the 550, that car really did move the game on. Still enjoy this though, and my life, as classic cars go, they're a bit of a bargain. Anyway, big thanks to Rob for lending me his lovely car. Thanks to you for watching. Please like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.